My name is Megan Hartwell. I am 38 years old. And right now, 53 phones are vibrating at the exact same moment. Not in an office. Not at a business meeting. Not during an emergency. They're buzzing around a Thanksgiving table. A table filled with my family. Aunts. Uncles. Cousins. Second cousins. People I haven't seen in years. All staring down at their screens. Then staring up at me. Because my mother has just sent a message to the entire Hartwell family group chat. The attachment is an invoice. The amount is $412,850. The subject line reads, "The cost of raising a daughter who failed." The backyard falls silent. Even the children stop talking. The only sound is the wind moving through the pine trees surrounding my grandmother's property outside Charleston, South Carolina. My mother sits at the far end of the table. Perfect posture. Perfect makeup. Perfect smile. The smile of someone who thinks she has already won. Everyone is waiting for my reaction. Some are expecting tears. Some are expecting anger. Some are expecting an apology. What none of them know is that the first 7 years of my life completely destroyed the story my mother has spent 30 years telling. And before this holiday ends, a photograph hidden inside my phone is going to expose everything. But to understand why that matters, you need to understand my family. You need to understand my mother. And you need to understand the woman who actually raised me. My grandmother. Evelyn Hartwell. The strongest person I have ever known. Most people describe Evelyn as sweet. That isn't wrong. It's just incomplete. Calling Evelyn sweet is like calling a hurricane windy. It misses the important parts. At 84 years old, she still wakes up before sunrise. She still balances her own checkbook. She still grows tomatoes in a garden bigger than some apartments. And she still has the ability to make grown adults tell the truth simply by looking at them. She spent 42 years working as an accountant. Numbers matter to her. Records matter to her. Truth matters to her. Which is exactly why my mother should have been terrified when she sent that invoice. Because my grandmother never throws anything away. Not photographs. Not receipts. Not letters. Not records. Not evidence. But my mother wasn't thinking about evidence. She was thinking about money. The problem began months before Thanksgiving. I didn't realize it at the time. I thought everything was normal. I was busy running my catering company. Busy raising my daughter Emma. Busy trying to balance work and family like every other adult I know. Then little things started happening. Small comments. Small rumors. Small conversations that didn't make sense. My cousin Rachel called one afternoon. "Megan," she said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why aren't you helping your mother?" I nearly laughed. "What are you talking about?" Rachel hesitated. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. "Aunt Diane says you've completely abandoned her." I sat in silence. Because abandoned? That was an interesting choice of words. Especially coming from my mother. The woman who had literally left me behind when I was a baby. Apparently Diane had been telling relatives that I never visited. Never called. Never helped. Never contributed. According to her version of events, she had sacrificed everything for me. And now I was leaving her to struggle alone. The story spread slowly. Like a crack moving through glass. One relative heard it. Then another. Then another. By summer, half the family believed it. By fall, most of them did. And by Thanksgiving? My mother was ready for her grand finale. The invoice. But long before any of that happened, there was a little white farmhouse. A crying baby. And a 20-year-old woman who didn't want to be a mother. That woman was Diane Carter. My mother. The story she tells today is simple. She says she worked tirelessly. She says she sacrificed everything. She says she raised me alone. The truth is different. The truth started on a cold November night. I know because my grandmother told me years later. I was 4 months old. My grandmother had just finished a late shift at work. She was exhausted. She walked into her kitchen expecting peace and quiet. Instead she found Diane standing beside the table. A diaper bag on the floor. A baby carrier in her hand. And me. Crying. According to Grandma Evelyn, my mother looked terrified. Not sad. Not emotional. Terrified. Like someone standing at the edge of a cliff. She placed the carrier on the table. Then she handed my grandmother an envelope. "I can't do this anymore." That was all she said. Then she left. No argument. No discussion. No plan. Just left. Grandma thought she would return the next morning. Then the next week. Then the next month. She didn't. Weeks became months. Months became years. And while Diane built a new life somewhere else, Evelyn became everything. Mother. Father. Teacher. Provider. Protector. Every birthday candle. Every scraped knee. Every nightmare. Every school event. Every doctor's appointment. Every bedtime story. Everything. The first memory I have is of my grandmother's kitchen. Not because it was extraordinary. Because it was safe. I remember standing on a chair beside her while she baked biscuits. I remember flour floating through sunlight. I remember her humming old songs. I remember feeling loved. Children don't care about money. They don't care about status. They care about who shows up. And every single day, Evelyn showed up. When I was 5, she taught me basic math using measuring cups. When I was 6, she taught me how to read recipes. When I was 7, she taught me how to make apple pie. Those lessons eventually became the foundation of my business. But at the time, they were simply moments between a grandmother and a little girl. Moments I assumed every child experienced. I didn't understand that my life was different. Not yet. That realization came later. The year my mother returned. The year everything changed. I was 7 years old. And one afternoon a shiny black car pulled into the driveway. I remember running to the window. I remember seeing a woman step out. Beautiful clothes. Perfect hair. Expensive sunglasses. A stranger. At least that's what she felt like. A stranger. And then my grandmother said 6 words that would change my life forever. "Megan, your mother is here." I remember freezing. Because I didn't know what that meant. I knew what a grandmother was. I knew what a teacher was. I knew what neighbors were. But mother? Mother was just a word. A word people used in books. A word other children talked about. A role already filled by someone else. The woman stepping out of that car was not my mother. Not really. Not in the ways that mattered. But she wanted the title. And eventually she took it. The problem was she wanted the title more than the responsibility. And over the next 30 years, she would spend an incredible amount of energy rewriting history. Rewriting where I lived. Who raised me? Who sacrificed? Who loved? Who stayed? And who left? By the time Thanksgiving arrived decades later, most people believed her version. Most people. But not everyone. Because my grandmother had records. And records don't care about feelings. They don't care about pride. They don't care about family politics. They only care about truth. And very soon, the truth was going to walk straight into Thanksgiving dinner. The day my mother came back, she didn't arrive alone. Standing beside her was a man named Richard Carter. Tall. Expensive watch. Pressed shirt. The kind of man who looked like he had never missed a payment in his life. Next to him stood a little girl with curly brown hair and bright green eyes. She was 4 years old. Her name was Jessica. My half-sister. At 7 years old, I didn't understand what half-sister meant. I only knew that everyone seemed excited. Grandma Evelyn was polite. Very polite. But I could tell something was wrong. Children notice things adults think they're hiding. The tightness around her eyes. The way she folded her hands. The extra second before answering questions. Something felt different. Something felt dangerous. That evening, after dinner, my grandmother tucked me into bed. Just like she always did. She kissed my forehead. Pulled the blanket higher. Then sat quietly on the edge of the mattress. "Megan? Yeah? No matter what happens, remember something." "What?" "I love you." I smiled. "I love you too." Her eyes filled with tears. At the time I didn't understand why. Years later I would. Because she already knew. She knew my mother hadn't come back because she suddenly wanted to be a parent. She had come back because she wanted a family that looked complete. And I was the missing piece. 3 months later, I was living in Charleston with Diane, Richard, and Jessica. Leaving my grandmother's house felt like someone had ripped the floor out from under me. I remember crying the entire drive. My mother told me I was being dramatic. Richard told me I'd adjust. Jessica sat quietly in the back seat. Nobody asked what I wanted. Nobody asked how I felt. Adults often confuse legal rights with emotional rights. Just because someone can make a decision doesn't mean it's the right decision. The new house was beautiful. Bigger than anything I'd ever lived in. 2 stories. Large backyard. Swimming pool. Fresh paint. Everything looked perfect. And that's exactly what my mother wanted. Perfect appearances. Perfect family photos. Perfect holiday cards. Perfect stories. The truth didn't matter nearly as much as the image. I learned that quickly. The first week, Diane took us to church. After the service, she introduced me to people. "This is my daughter Megan." People smiled. They complimented her. Told her what a wonderful mother she must be. She accepted every compliment. Every single one. Without mentioning Grandma Evelyn. Without mentioning the 7 years she missed. Without mentioning the woman who had actually raised me. I remember standing there feeling confused. Not angry. Not yet. Just confused. Because everyone was praising her for work someone else had done. The older I got, the more obvious the favoritism became. Jessica got new bicycles. I got hand-me-downs. Jessica got dance lessons. I got told they were too expensive. Jessica got birthday parties. I got family dinners. Jessica got encouragement. I got criticism. Nothing dramatic enough to attract attention. Just small things. Thousands of small things. Tiny cuts. Tiny reminders. Tiny messages. You matter less. You matter less. You matter less. One Christmas stands out. I was 12. Jessica was 9. She received a brand new laptop. The newest model available. I received a sweater. Not a bad sweater. Just a sweater. The difference wasn't the gifts. The difference was what the gifts represented. Investment. Expectation. Belief. My mother believed Jessica would become successful. I was simply expected to exist quietly. At 13 I started baking more seriously. Cookies. Cakes. Pies. Anything I could learn. I spent entire weekends experimenting in the kitchen. When something turned out well, Grandma Evelyn celebrated. When my mother noticed, she rolled her eyes. You spend too much time baking. I'm learning. You're hiding. The criticism continued through high school. When I entered a regional baking competition and won second place, my grandmother framed the certificate. My mother asked whether I'd finished my math homework. When I earned money selling cakes to neighbors, Grandma called me entrepreneurial. My mother called it a distraction. By the time I graduated high school, 2 versions of me existed. The version my grandmother saw. Creative. Determined. Hardworking. And the version my mother saw. Disappointment. Potential wasted. Not enough. Never enough. Then college arrived. And for a little while, things improved. I enrolled at a university 3 hours away. For the first time in years, I could breathe. For the first time, I wasn't being compared to Jessica every day. For the first time, I could build something that belonged entirely to me. I studied business management. Worked part-time. Learned quickly. Made friends. Built confidence. And then Grandma Evelyn had her first stroke. The call came at 2:17 in the morning. I still remember the exact time. Hospitals create memories like that. Permanent ones. The doctor explained the situation. Recovery would take months. Maybe longer. She would need help. A lot of help. I called my mother immediately. Her response took less than 30 seconds. I can't. What do you mean you can't? I'm busy. Grandma needs someone. I have responsibilities. So do I. Silence. Then she said something I'll never forget. You'll figure it out. Not we. Not us. You. I sat in that hospital hallway staring at my phone. Realizing something important. The woman who raised me needed help. The woman who gave birth to me wasn't going to provide it. So I left school. Everyone talks about sacrifice differently. Some people sacrifice money. Some sacrifice time. Some sacrifice dreams. Leaving college wasn't easy. I was 2 years away from graduating. 2 years. But when I pictured my grandmother struggling alone, the decision became simple. Not easy. Simple. I moved back. Took care of Evelyn. Worked odd jobs. And started baking professionally from a rented commercial kitchen. The kitchen was tiny. The oven barely worked. The rent was terrifying. But it was mine. My first month in business, I made less than $800. My second month, slightly more. Most businesses fail in the beginning. Mine nearly did. Several times. There were weeks I honestly thought I would lose everything. Then came a breakthrough. A local wedding planner ordered desserts. The event went well. She referred another client. Then another. Then another. Slowly, the business grew. Year after year. Customer after customer. Cake after cake. Until one day I looked around and realized I had employees. Then multiple employees. Then contracts. Then corporate accounts. Then success. The funny thing about success is that some people only respect it after strangers do. My mother never praised my work when it was small. She only started mentioning it once other people did. Even then, she found ways to minimize it. Megan makes desserts. Megan owns a little catering company. Megan is doing okay. As if I were playing business instead of running one. Meanwhile Jessica followed a very different path. She became exactly the daughter Diane always wanted. Successful. Educated. Polished. Everything looked perfect. And honestly? Jessica wasn't a bad person. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't arrogant. She simply believed what she'd been told. If someone spends 20 years hearing the same story, eventually they stop questioning it. According to Diane, I was selfish. Difficult. Ungrateful. A daughter who constantly disappointed her. Jessica believed it because why wouldn't she? The source was her mother. The person she trusted most. By the time we reached our 30s, we barely spoke. Not because we hated each other. Because we lived in completely different realities. Then things started changing. Slowly. Almost invisibly. Jessica began noticing inconsistencies. Stories that didn't match. Dates that didn't line up. Comments from older relatives. Questions without answers. And somewhere in the back of her mind, doubt started growing. The same doubt that would eventually explode at Thanksgiving. But before Thanksgiving came another problem. Money. Specifically my mother's money. At first nobody knew she was struggling. She hid it well. Very well. The designer clothes remained. The expensive car remained. The social media posts remained. The appearance of success remained. But appearances can be financed. Reality eventually sends invoices. And Diane's reality was becoming expensive. Very expensive. Especially after she became obsessed with purchasing a luxury waterfront home she couldn't truly afford. That house would become the reason everything happened. The reason she targeted me. The reason she created the invoice. The reason she spent months poisoning family relationships. Because people do strange things when pride becomes more important than honesty. And my mother was about to do something stranger than any of us imagined. Months before Thanksgiving, she began building her case. One relative at a time. One conversation at a time. One lie at a time. And none of us realized how far she was willing to go. Not yet. The invoice hadn't arrived. The group chat hadn't exploded. The photograph hadn't been sent. The shoebox remained unopened. But the storm was already forming. And it was heading directly toward Thanksgiving dinner. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. At the time, I missed them. Most of us do. When you're busy living your life, you don't notice someone quietly building a case against you. You don't notice every conversation they're having behind your back. Every exaggerated story. Every carefully planted doubt. Every small lie repeated until it sounds like a fact. That's exactly what my mother was doing. And she was good at it. Very good. For months before Thanksgiving, Diane Carter worked the family network like a politician preparing for an election. One phone call here. One lunch there. One emotional conversation after church. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just enough to shape opinions. Just enough to create a narrative. A narrative where she was the exhausted victim. And I was the selfish daughter who had abandoned her. The strange part? The more successful my business became, the more aggressively she pushed that story. At first I couldn't understand why. Success should have made her proud. Or at least less critical. Instead it seemed to make her angry. Every accomplishment became proof that I somehow owed her. If I landed a large corporate contract? She reminded people she had supported me. If my company hired new employees? She reminded everyone she had sacrificed for me. If my business expanded? She claimed credit. According to Diane, every good thing in my life existed because of her. Every struggle belonged to me. Every success belonged to her. The pattern became impossible to ignore. One afternoon my cousin Rachel stopped by my bakery. She ordered coffee. Sat down. Looked nervous. Megan. Yeah? I think something weird is happening. I laughed. In my family? Impossible. She didn't smile. That got my attention. What is it? Rachel stirred her coffee. Then lowered her voice. Aunt Diane is telling people you're refusing to help her financially. I frowned. What? She says you've become wealthy and you don't care about family anymore. I stared at her. For a second I honestly thought she was joking. Then I realized she wasn't. Rachel. Yeah? My mother has never asked me for money. Rachel blinked. Seriously? Seriously. That was the first moment something clicked. Because if Diane truly needed help, she could have called. She had my number. She knew where I lived. Instead she was telling everyone else. Not me. Everyone else. Which meant the goal wasn't money. Not yet. The goal was perception. A few weeks later another strange thing happened. I attended a charity fundraiser downtown. Several local business owners were there. Real estate agents. Restaurant owners. Event planners. People I knew professionally. During the evening, a woman I barely knew approached me. She smiled politely. Then asked a question that nearly made me choke on my drink. How is your mother doing? I shrugged. Fine, I guess. The woman hesitated. Then said. I heard you're not speaking anymore. My stomach tightened. What? Never mind. No. Tell me. The woman looked uncomfortable. I just heard there were family issues. Family issues. That phrase followed me for weeks. Different people. Different conversations. Same implication. Someone was talking. Someone was spreading a story. And eventually I learned exactly who. Meanwhile, Diane's own financial situation was becoming worse. Much worse. But hardly anyone knew. Her social media remained perfect. Luxury dinners. Smiling photos. Vacation pictures. Designer handbags. Every image carefully selected. Every image designed to communicate success. Reality looked different. 3 credit cards were nearly maxed out. 2 loans were overdue. Her commission income had fallen significantly. And the waterfront home she desperately wanted required a down payment she couldn't afford. My grandmother knew. Not because Diane told her. Because Diane kept asking for money. Again. And again. And again. Grandma Evelyn never spoke badly about her daughter. Not once. Even when she probably should have. She simply helped. Quietly. Without publicity. Without credit. Without conditions. The first loan was small. Then another. Then another. Over time they grew larger. And Diane kept promising she'd pay everything back. She never did. Grandma never pressured her. Never embarrassed her. Never exposed her. She simply kept records. Dates. Amounts. Notes. The habits of a lifelong accountant. Records that would eventually become very important. Around that same time, my relationship with Jessica started changing. It wasn't dramatic. Just different. For years we'd existed in separate worlds. Now she was asking questions. Questions my mother didn't like. One evening Jessica called unexpectedly. We hadn't spoken in nearly 2 months. Megan? Hey. There was a pause. Then, can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you leave college? I laughed. That's random. Mom says you quit because you didn't want to work hard. The laugh disappeared. Oh. Silence. Then I told her. The hospital. The stroke. The recovery. The caregiving. Everything. Jessica listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't argue. Just listened. When I finished, she was quiet. Finally she said. Mom never told me any of that. I know. Another pause. Then, Grandma really needed that much help? Yes. And nobody else stepped up? No. She exhaled slowly. For the first time, I could hear uncertainty in her voice. Tiny cracks forming. Tiny pieces of the story shifting. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. When it ended, I sat staring at my phone. Something had changed. Not dramatically. Not completely. But enough. Jessica had started questioning the narrative. And once people start questioning a story, controlling it becomes much harder. Unfortunately, my mother didn't know that yet. She was too focused on Thanksgiving. Too focused on her plan. A plan that was becoming more elaborate every week. Months later, I learned she'd been drafting versions of the invoice for nearly 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Can you imagine that? Most people spend 6 weeks planning vacations. Or weddings. Or business projects. My mother spent 6 weeks creating a bill for her own daughter. Adjusting numbers. Adding categories. Rewriting language. Making everything appear official. The amount changed repeatedly. 300,000. Then 350. Then 400. Eventually settling at $412,850. A number chosen not because it was accurate. Because it felt impressive. Large enough to shock. Large enough to create guilt. Large enough to make people stop asking questions. The categories were ridiculous. Childhood expenses. Emotional support. Educational opportunities. Personal sacrifices. Years of dedication. Lost opportunities. Every item carefully designed to create a single conclusion. You owe me. The deeper issue wasn't money. The deeper issue was ownership. Diane genuinely believed she owned part of my success. Not because she'd earned it. Because she was my mother. In her mind, biology created a debt that could never be repaid. The fact that someone else had actually raised me was inconvenient. The fact that Grandma Evelyn had sacrificed more was irrelevant. The fact that I'd spent years helping Grandma financially didn't fit the story. So those facts had to disappear. The narrative required a villain. I became that villain. And Thanksgiving became the courtroom. About 2 weeks before the holiday, I noticed another strange shift. Family members stopped responding normally. Messages felt colder. Conversations felt shorter. Something was off. One cousin canceled plans. An aunt suddenly became distant. Even people who usually called regularly seemed hesitant. I couldn't figure it out. Until Rachel called again. Megan. What's wrong? Aunt Diane says she's finally going to confront you. I frowned. Confront me about what? Rachel laughed nervously. Apparently everything. That should have worried me more than it did. Instead I shrugged it off. Because normal people don't send invoices to their children. Normal people don't organize public humiliations during family holidays. Normal people don't spend 6 weeks preparing evidence for crimes that never happened. I made the mistake of assuming my mother would behave like a normal person. She didn't. The week before Thanksgiving, she finalized everything. The invoice. The group message. The speech. The accusations. The performance. She had rehearsed all of it. What she hadn't prepared for was one small problem. A problem sitting quietly inside an old closet at Grandma Evelyn's house. A worn-out shoebox. Filled with 30 years of records. 30 years of photographs. 30 years of receipts. 30 years of truth. And another problem. A faded photograph stored in my phone. A photograph my mother had forgotten existed. The picture itself wasn't dramatic. No screaming. No confrontation. No obvious scandal. Just a grandmother holding a child. But sometimes the most powerful evidence is the simplest. Because simple things are difficult to explain away. Especially when dates are involved. Especially when memories are involved. Especially when 53 people are watching. The night before Thanksgiving, I stood in my kitchen preparing desserts. Apple pies. Pecan pies. Pumpkin rolls. The usual holiday orders. I remember feeling tired. But happy. Business was doing well. Emma was healthy. Grandma was strong. Life felt stable. I had absolutely no idea that less than 24 hours later my entire family would be staring at an invoice accusing me of being a failure. I had no idea my mother had spent weeks preparing an ambush. And I definitely had no idea that before the holiday ended, a single photograph would begin unraveling 30 years of lies. Thanksgiving morning arrived clear and cold. The kind of southern morning where the sky looks painted. I loaded desserts into my car, kissed Emma on the forehead, and started driving toward Grandma Evelyn's house. Completely unaware that the most important family confrontation of my life was only a few hours away. And waiting for me at the end of that drive was a woman holding a bill for $412,850. A woman convinced she had already won. She couldn't have been more wrong. Thanksgiving morning felt normal. That's the strange thing about life-changing days. They rarely announce themselves. There was no warning. No feeling in my stomach. No sign from the universe. Just sunshine. Coffee. Traffic. And a car full of desserts. I arrived at Grandma Evelyn's farmhouse shortly after 11. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I pulled into the driveway. The house looked exactly as it always had. White siding. Green shutters. A wraparound porch. The old oak tree in the front yard stretching its branches across half the property. Emma pressed her face against the car window. Great-grandma's house. I smiled. That's right. She was excited. 8 years old. Full of energy. The kind of child who believes every holiday is magical. I hoped she would stay inside long enough not to witness what was coming. Though at that moment I had no idea there was anything to witness. Grandma Evelyn met us at the front door. 84 years old. Silver hair. Warm smile. Strong eyes. The same eyes that had watched over me my entire life. She hugged Emma first. Then me. And for a moment everything felt peaceful. Safe. Normal. I wish I could freeze that moment. Because once we stepped inside, things began changing. Slowly. Almost invisibly. The dining room was already crowded. Family members filled every corner of the house. Laughter drifted from the kitchen. Football played on the television. Children ran through hallways. The smell of turkey and cinnamon filled the air. At first, everything seemed fine. Then I started noticing the looks. Tiny things. Little pauses. Conversations stopping when I approached. Relatives exchanging glances. The kind of behavior people think is subtle. But isn't. Rachel noticed it too. She walked over carrying a glass of sweet tea. You feeling it? I frowned. Feeling what? She lowered her voice. The weirdness. I laughed nervously. So it's not just me? Nope. That answer didn't make me feel better. Across the room I spotted Diane. My mother. She looked unusually happy. Not relaxed. Not cheerful. Satisfied. Like someone who knew a secret. She was moving from group to group. Talking. Smiling. Touching shoulders. Building connections. Gathering attention. Looking back now, she was preparing the room. Preparing her audience. At the time I simply thought she was being social. Jessica arrived shortly after noon with her husband. The moment she saw me, she hesitated. Something was different. The old confidence wasn't there. The certainty. Instead she looked conflicted. Thoughtful. As though she had been replaying our recent conversations in her head. She hugged me. A little awkwardly. But genuinely. Hey. You okay? I smiled. Should I not be? She looked toward our mother. Then back at me. I don't know. That answer sat with me. Something was wrong. Jessica knew it. Rachel knew it. I knew it. The only question was what. Lunch preparations continued. People carried dishes into the dining room. Turkey, ham, stuffing, sweet potatoes, green bean casserole, pecan pie, the usual Thanksgiving spread. Grandma moved carefully through the crowd, checking on everything, making sure everyone had what they needed. Every few minutes I'd catch Diane watching me. Not casually. Intently. Like she was waiting for something. Around 1:30, everyone finally sat down. Or at least tried to. There were too many people for the table. Some sat in folding chairs. Others gathered around smaller tables nearby. More than 50 relatives. 3 generations. One enormous family gathering. And one hidden bomb waiting to explode. The meal started normally. Conversation. Laughter. Stories. Football. For a while I almost relaxed. Then Uncle Stephen asked about my business. Big mistake. So Megan, he said. How many employees now? 14. Several people looked impressed. I wasn't bragging. Just answering the question. But before anyone could respond, Diane jumped in. It's amazing what people can accomplish when they have support. The comment sounded harmless. Almost complimentary. Almost. I smiled politely. Yeah, I've been lucky. Grandma glanced at me. She heard it too. The implication. The claim. The quiet attempt to take credit. The conversation moved on. A few minutes later it happened again. Someone mentioned a large catering contract. Diane immediately reminded everyone how much she'd encouraged me growing up. Then another story. Another reminder. Another subtle claim. Every success somehow circled back to her. Eventually even Jessica noticed. I could see it on her face. Confusion. Discomfort. Questions. The atmosphere grew stranger as the afternoon continued. People laughed less. Watched more. Waited. Though none of us knew exactly what we were waiting for. Around 3 o'clock dessert was served. The moment everything changed. I was cutting slices of pecan pie when I heard a spoon tapping against a glass. Clink. 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 The room gradually fell silent. I turned. Diane was standing. Smiling. Holding her glass. Immediately my stomach tightened. Because this wasn't normal. People give speeches at weddings. Retirement parties. Anniversaries. Not random Thanksgiving dinners. My family, she began. Her voice carried easily through the room. I just wanted to say a few words. The room quieted completely. Grandma stopped moving. Jessica lowered her fork. Rachel stared at the floor. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Diane smiled. As many of you know, being a mother has been the greatest sacrifice of my life. The word sacrifice hung in the air. I felt my jaw tighten. Not because it was false. Because I knew where it was heading. For the next several minutes she spoke about hardship. Responsibility. Dedication. Everything she'd supposedly endured for her daughters. Especially me. Every story painted the same picture. Diane the hero. Megan the burden. Diane the provider. Megan the disappointment. Some relatives nodded sympathetically. Others looked uncomfortable. Jessica looked horrified. Then Diane reached into her purse. And my stomach dropped. Because she pulled out a stack of papers. Perfectly printed. Perfectly organized. She smiled. Then looked directly at me. Megan. The room froze. I set down the pie knife. Slowly. What? She held up the papers. I've spent months thinking about how to explain this. A chill moved through my body. Every instinct told me something terrible was coming. Then Diane lifted her phone. And pressed a button. 53 phones buzzed simultaneously. Every person in the room looked down. Every screen displayed the same message. Hartwell Family Group Chat. New attachment. The cost of raising a daughter who failed. $412,850. For a moment nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. The silence felt enormous. Then people started opening the file. One by one. Eyes scanning. Expressions changing. Confusion. Shock. Disbelief. I opened it too. And there it was. Page after page. Category after category. Charges. Expenses. Sacrifices. Emotional labor. Educational costs. Years of support. Years of dedication. A grand total of $412,850. At the bottom, highlighted in red. If repayment is impossible, public acknowledgement of responsibility is requested. The room seemed to tilt. Not because I was hurt. Because I genuinely couldn't believe what I was seeing. This wasn't a joke. She had actually done it. She had actually created an invoice. For her own daughter. And sent it to 53 relatives. At Thanksgiving. Grandma Evelyn slowly removed her glasses. A bad sign. A very bad sign. Anyone who knew her understood. When Grandma removed her glasses, somebody was about to regret something. Diane continued speaking. Confident. Smiling. Completely unaware of the disaster she had just triggered. I've spent 38 years sacrificing for Megan. She looked around the room. And I think it's time that sacrifice was acknowledged. No one responded. Not immediately. People were still reading. Still processing. Still trying to understand whether this was real. Unfortunately for Diane, it was very real. And the more people read, the worse things became. Because right there on page 1 were the years that would destroy her. Birth to age 7. The years she claimed to have raised me. The years she claimed to have paid for. The years she claimed to have sacrificed. The years Grandma Evelyn had actually lived. Actually worked. Actually struggled. Actually raised me. And sitting quietly in another room. Inside an old closet. Was a shoebox containing enough evidence to destroy every word she had just spoken. At that moment, nobody knew it yet. Not even Diane. But the story she had spent 30 years building was about to crack. And once it cracked, it would never be repaired. I looked down at my phone. Then across the room at my grandmother. Our eyes met. She already knew. She knew exactly which section of the invoice I had noticed. She knew exactly what evidence existed. And for the first time all afternoon, Grandma Evelyn gave the smallest nod. Not approval. Not encouragement. A reminder. The truth was still sitting in that house. Waiting. And before Thanksgiving dinner ended, the truth was finally going to speak. The silence lasted longer than anyone expected. Not a few seconds. Not even half a minute. Nearly a full minute of 53 people staring at their phones. Reading. Scrolling. Rereading. Trying to understand what they were looking at. The only sounds in the room were the ticking of the old wall clock and the distant commentary from the football game still playing in the living room. I sat perfectly still. Not because I was calm. Because I was stunned. There are moments in life so absurd your brain refuses to process them immediately. This was one of those moments. My own mother had created a professional-looking invoice. Printed it. Formatted it. Sent it to 53 relatives. And attached a price tag to my existence. Across the table, Rachel looked like she wanted to disappear. Uncle Stephen was rubbing his forehead. Jessica hadn't moved at all. Meanwhile Diane stood confidently at the head of the room. Waiting. Expecting applause. Validation. Support. Anything. Instead she got silence. And silence made her nervous. I saw it happen. A tiny change. A tiny crack. The smile became slightly forced. The shoulders stiffened. The eyes started moving from face to face. Searching. Looking for agreement. Looking for allies. Finding none. Finally she cleared her throat. Well? Nobody answered. The silence continued. Then Aunt Caroline spoke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough for everyone to hear. Diane? Yes? What exactly is this? The question seemed simple. But it wasn't. Because Diane didn't actually have a good answer. It's an accounting of everything I've sacrificed. Caroline frowned. For your daughter? Yes. Why? The room shifted. People looked up from their phones. Diane blinked. What do you mean why? I mean why are you billing your daughter? A few relatives nodded. Good question. A very good question. Unfortunately Diane wasn't prepared for questions. She was prepared for agreement. Those are different things. You don't understand. Her voice sharpened. No, Diane, Uncle Stephen said. I don't. More silence. The room was changing. Not dramatically. Yet. But enough. Diane could feel it too. That's why she did what she always did when losing control. She became louder. I spent 38 years supporting Megan. Nobody responded. She continued. I sacrificed opportunities. Still nothing. I put my life on hold. A few uncomfortable looks. Then finally she pointed directly at me. And I think the least she can do is acknowledge it. Every eye turned toward me. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Much warmer. Much harder to breathe. This was the moment she'd planned. The confrontation. The public pressure. The humiliation. She wanted me emotional. Defensive. Angry. Anything that would make me look unreasonable. Instead I asked one question. A very simple question. Mom. What? Did you raise me from birth? The room froze again. Diane blinked. The question caught her off guard. Of course I did. I nodded slowly. From birth? Yes. You're sure? A strange expression crossed her face. Just for a second. Then disappeared. Absolutely. I looked down at the invoice. Then back up. Because page 1 says you paid for raising me from birth through age 7. That's correct. I nodded again. Slowly. Carefully. Across the table, Grandma Evelyn had gone completely still. She wasn't eating. Wasn't speaking. Wasn't moving. She was watching. The way judges watch. The way accountants watch. The way people watch when they already know the answer. I asked another question. What elementary school did I attend when I was 5? Diane frowned. What? What school? She hesitated. A tiny hesitation. But people noticed. Especially older relatives. Especially people who remembered. You know what school, she snapped. I want you to say it. The room became painfully quiet. Diane shifted her weight. Then looked away. For the first time all afternoon, she didn't have an answer ready. Because she couldn't answer. Because she wasn't there. Because she didn't know. Uncle Stephen slowly lowered his phone. Diane? His voice was cautious. Didn't Megan live with Evelyn during those years? The question landed like a stone. Jessica looked up immediately. Rachel looked at Grandma. Several older relatives exchanged glances. Memories were waking up. Old memories. Forgotten memories. Dangerous memories. Diane recovered quickly. Temporarily. Stephen frowned. 7 years is temporary? Nobody laughed. Nobody smiled. The room remained silent. Diane's face reddened. I was getting my life together. And Evelyn raised Megan? She helped. The answer made several people look uncomfortable. Because help wasn't the right word. Not even close. Everyone in that room understood the difference between helping and raising. One is support. The other is responsibility. And suddenly people were remembering who carried that responsibility. Then Jessica spoke. Quietly. Almost reluctantly. Mom. Diane looked relieved. Finally. An ally. What, sweetheart? Jessica swallowed. Then asked the worst possible question. If Grandma only helped. She paused. Then why do I remember Megan living there when I was little? The room froze. Diane stared at her. Completely unprepared. Jessica continued. I remember birthday parties there. Another pause. I remember Christmas there. Another. I remember school pictures there. The expression on Diane's face changed. For the first time that day, fear appeared. Real fear. Because Jessica wasn't supposed to question anything. Jessica was supposed to support her. Believe her. Defend her. Instead she was remembering. And memory is dangerous when lies depend on forgetting. No. Diane shook her head. You don't understand. Then explain it. Jessica's voice was steady. Not angry. Not emotional. Just honest. The kind of honesty that terrifies dishonest people. The room had completely turned now. Not against Diane. Not yet. But toward the truth. People were asking questions. Comparing memories. Connecting dots. And every answer Diane gave created 2 more questions. I didn't need to attack. Didn't need to argue. Didn't need to defend myself. The facts were doing the work. Across the room, Grandma Evelyn finally stood. Slowly. Carefully. Every conversation stopped immediately. Everyone watched. Because when Evelyn Hartwell stood during a family argument, it meant something important was about to happen. She walked past the dining table. Past the living room. Down the hallway. Without saying a word. The house fell silent. We heard a closet door open. Then close. A few moments later she returned. Carrying something in both hands. An old shoebox. Worn. Faded. Held together with a rubber band. My heart skipped. I knew that box. I'd seen it before. Not often. But enough. The room watched her place it carefully in the center of the dining table. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Even Diane looked frightened now. Because she recognized it too. The shoebox sat between the dishes and desserts like a witness waiting to testify. Grandma rested one hand on top of it. Then looked directly at Diane. Not angry. Not emotional. Just disappointed. The worst expression an honest person can give. Diane. Her voice was calm. Very calm. Are you absolutely certain you want to continue this conversation? The room went silent. Completely silent. Diane stared at the box. Then at her mother. Then back at the box again. She knew something was inside. Something important. Something dangerous. For several seconds nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. Then Diane made the biggest mistake of her life. She lifted her chin. Crossed her arms. And said, yes. Grandma nodded once. Slowly. Almost sadly. Then she removed the rubber band from the box. And for the first time in 30 years, the truth prepared to come out. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even reached for their drinks. Every eye in the room was fixed on the shoebox sitting in the center of the dining table. The old cardboard looked ordinary. Worn corners. Faded lid. A rubber band that had probably been replaced a dozen times over the years. Nothing about it looked important. And yet somehow it had become the most important object in the house. Grandma Evelyn rested both hands on the lid. Not protectively. Not dramatically. Almost respectfully. Like someone about to introduce an old witness. Across the table, Diane's confidence was fading. The smile was gone. The posture remained. The attitude remained. But the certainty had vanished. Because certainty depends on control. And she was beginning to lose control. Slowly. Publicly. Irreversibly. Evelyn looked around the room. At her children. Her grandchildren. Her great-grandchildren. People she'd known their entire lives. Then she spoke. I never wanted to open this. Her voice was calm. Steady. The room remained silent. I kept these things because I worked with numbers for 42 years. She glanced toward the box. Records matter. Nobody interrupted. Nobody dared. When Megan was a baby, I started saving documents. A pause. Receipts. Another pause. Medical records. Another. Photographs. The room seemed to lean forward collectively. And letters. That final word hit differently. Letters. Not opinions. Not memories. Letters. Written evidence. Permanent evidence. The kind that doesn't change over time. The kind that survives long after stories evolve. Diane swallowed. Hard. I saw it. So did Jessica. So did half the room. Grandma slowly lifted the lid. The smell of old paper drifted into the air. Inside were neatly organized bundles. Photographs. Folders. Envelopes. Small notebooks. Everything arranged with the precision of an accountant. Because that's exactly what she was. The room stared. Evelyn reached inside and removed the first item. A photograph. She handed it to Uncle Stephen. He looked at it. Then passed it to Rachel. Then another person. Then another. The photograph began moving around the room. People studying it carefully. Expressions changing as they looked. Finally it reached me. I already knew what it was. A picture from 1991. I couldn't have been more than 6 months old. I was sitting in a high chair. Covered in birthday cake frosting. Laughing. Behind me stood Grandma Evelyn. Smiling. Holding the cake knife. There was no Diane. No mother. No sign she had ever been there. Just Grandma. The room continued examining photographs. Picture after picture. Birthday parties. School events. Christmas mornings. Easter gatherings. Family reunions. Years of moments. Years of memories. Years of evidence. One thing remained constant. Grandma Evelyn appeared in every photograph. I appeared in every photograph. Diane appeared in almost none of them. At first nobody said anything. Then Uncle Stephen quietly asked. What year is this one? 1993, Grandma replied. He frowned. And this? 1994. Another photograph. And this? 1995. A long silence followed. The dates were becoming impossible to ignore. 7 years. 7 entire years. Not 7 weekends. Not 7 months. 7 years. Jessica was staring at the photographs as though seeing her own childhood for the first time. Then Grandma reached into the box again. This time she removed a small folder. Blue. Thin. Worn from age. Her hands lingered on it. Longer than anything else. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed slightly. Not weaker. Just heavier. There is one thing in here I hoped nobody would ever need to read. The room became perfectly still. I felt my stomach tighten. Because I knew what it was. Or at least I thought I did. Grandma opened the folder. Carefully. Then removed a folded sheet of paper. Yellowed with age. Creases running across it. The handwriting visible even from across the room. Diane immediately went pale. Not nervous pale. Not embarrassed pale. Terrified pale. The kind of pale that happens when someone realizes evidence still exists. The kind that happens when someone understands the truth is about to become public. Mom. Her voice sounded different now. Smaller. Evelyn. Grandma didn't look at her. She unfolded the letter. The paper crackled softly. The sound echoed through the silent room. Then she spoke. This letter was left on my kitchen table 38 years ago. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. The room was completely hers now. And everyone knew it. Grandma looked down at the page. Then began reading. Mom. The room held its breath. I can't do this anymore. Silence. Absolute silence. She's crying all the time. A pause. I don't know how to be a mother. Jessica's eyes widened. Diane stared at the floor. Grandma continued. I need to leave. Nobody spoke. Nobody interrupted. Nobody could. Because every word felt heavier than the one before. Then came the line that changed everything. The line that shattered 30 years of storytelling. The line nobody in the room would ever forget. Grandma looked down. Took a breath. Then read. Please take care of Megan until I'm ready to come back. The room froze. Not emotionally. Physically. People stopped moving. Stopped breathing. Stopped existing anywhere except that moment. The words hung in the air. Impossible to explain away. Impossible to reinterpret. Impossible to argue with. Written by Diane herself. In her own handwriting. In her own words. Not Grandma's memory. Not my version. Not family gossip. The truth. Documented. Permanent. Real. Jessica covered her mouth. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Uncle Stephen leaned back in his chair. Looking stunned. Meanwhile Diane looked like the ground had disappeared beneath her. Because the story she'd told for decades depended on one thing. Nobody finding that letter. And now everyone had. Grandma folded the paper carefully. Then placed it on the table. Right beside the invoice. The contrast was devastating. One document invented. One document authentic. One demanding payment. One admitting abandonment. One written last month. One written 38 years ago. The room didn't need help understanding the difference. Then Uncle Stephen asked the question everyone was thinking. Diane? His voice was quiet. Very quiet. Is this real? No answer. Diane? Still nothing. Finally she spoke. Barely above a whisper. Yes. The room reacted like someone had opened a window. A collective exhale. A collective realization. A collective understanding. Because confirmation changed everything. Suddenly the photographs mattered more. The dates mattered more. The invoice mattered more. Every conversation from the last 30 years mattered more. Jessica slowly looked toward her mother. Her eyes were wet. Not angry. Heartbroken. You left her? The question sounded almost childlike. Simple. Honest. Painful. Diane opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Nothing came out. Because there was no explanation that could survive the letter. No version of events that could erase her own handwriting. No speech that could undo what everyone had just heard. The room wasn't looking at me anymore. They weren't looking at the invoice. They weren't even looking at Grandma. They were looking at Diane. And for the first time in her life, she had nowhere to hide. But Grandma wasn't finished. Not even close. Because sitting inside that shoebox was one final piece of evidence. A photograph. One photograph. A photograph that would become the image everyone remembered. The image that would spread through the family group chat. The image that would finally destroy the last defense Diane had left. Grandma reached into the box one more time. And when I saw what she pulled out, I immediately knew exactly what was about to happen. Grandma Evelyn held the photograph carefully. For a moment she simply looked at it. Then she handed it to me. The instant I saw it, I knew. It was the picture. The picture that had survived 3 decades. The picture my mother had forgotten existed. Mother's Day. The old farmhouse porch. Grandma Evelyn holding me on her hip. A toddler laughing into the sunlight. The date written clearly across the bottom. And one thing missing. My mother. The woman who claimed she had raised me from birth wasn't anywhere in the frame. Because she wasn't anywhere in my life. Not then. Not for years. The room watched as the photograph made its way around the table. One relative after another studied it. Nobody argued. Nobody questioned it. The image spoke for itself. Eventually Uncle Stephen held it up. Diane. She wouldn't look at him. Diane, where were you? No answer. Jessica finally stood. Slowly. Her hands were shaking. Not with anger. With heartbreak. Her entire childhood had been built on a version of reality that was collapsing in front of her. Mom. Diane stared at the floor. Look at me. Nothing. Mom, look at me. Finally Diane lifted her head. Jessica's eyes were filled with tears. You lied to me. The room fell silent. I never lied. The answer came automatically. Instinctively. The way people answer when they've repeated something so many times it feels true. Jessica shook her head. Stop. Diane froze. Just stop. The words landed harder than any accusation. Because they came from the daughter who had always believed her. The daughter who had always defended her. The daughter she never thought she'd lose. Jessica looked around the room. At the photographs. At the letter. At the invoice. Then back at Diane. You told me Megan abandoned the family. Silence. You told me she never helped Grandma. Silence. You told me she was selfish. Another silence. Then Jessica asked the question nobody else had been willing to ask. Why? Diane opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Nothing. Because the truth sounded ugly. Even to her. Meanwhile the family group chat had become absolute chaos. Messages poured in every few seconds. People wanted explanations. People wanted answers. People wanted the truth. Someone uploaded another old photograph. Then another. Then another. Pictures from birthdays. School events. Family reunions. The same pattern every time. Megan. Grandma Evelyn. No Diane. The evidence kept growing. The story kept collapsing. And the family kept watching. Eventually Uncle Stephen spoke again. Diane, tell us the truth. This time she did. Not all of it. Just enough. Her voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't ready. Nobody spoke. I was young. Still silence. I was overwhelmed. Grandma nodded slowly. The room listened. Those explanations made sense. What didn't make sense was what came afterward. The decades of lies. The rewritten history. The public humiliation. The invoice. And that's when Grandma opened the ledger. The room changed again. Because this wasn't about abandonment anymore. This was about money. Years of money. Pages of records. Dates. Amounts. Loans. Emergency assistance. Wedding deposits. Mortgage payments. Car repairs. Medical bills. Every dollar carefully recorded. The total exceeded $40,000. Jessica looked stunned. You told everyone nobody helped you. Diane looked away. Grandma closed the ledger. Because she asked me not to tell anyone. The room understood. Suddenly the invoice made sense. The timing. The pressure. The accusations. Everything. Rachel was the first to say it. This was about money. Nobody argued. Because it was obvious now. The invoice had never been about gratitude. It had never been about respect. It had never been about parenting. It was an attempt to collect money. From me. The successful daughter she had spent years criticizing. The daughter she thought would stay quiet. The daughter she underestimated. The room felt different after that. The illusion was gone. The performance was over. Only reality remained. Eventually Diane left. No dramatic speech. No final argument. No victory. She simply picked up her purse and walked out. The front door closed behind her. And nobody followed. Not even Jessica. That hurt her more than anything. The next morning the fallout began. Relatives started leaving the family group chat. Then blocking Diane entirely. One by one. Not because I asked them to. Because trust had been broken. By noon nearly everyone had cut contact. The only person who didn't was Grandma Evelyn. When I asked why, she gave a simple answer. Blocking someone doesn't teach them anything. I didn't understand what she meant. Not yet. The following afternoon she called another family gathering. Smaller this time. More serious. When everyone arrived, the shoebox sat in the middle of the table again. Grandma stood. Straightened her shoulders. And delivered the speech nobody expected. She didn't attack Diane. She didn't insult her. She didn't shame her. She simply drew a boundary. No more money. The room stayed silent. No more excuses. A pause. No more lies. Another pause. And until she learns to tell the truth, she is not welcome in this house. That sentence changed everything. Because everyone knew what it cost Grandma to say it. She loved her daughter. Always would. But love without accountability had created this disaster. Now accountability had arrived. Over the next few weeks the consequences spread. Several real estate clients left Diane's agency. People stopped trusting her. Church leadership quietly asked her to step away from volunteer positions. Friends became distant. Not out of cruelty. Out of caution. Trust takes years to build. Minutes to destroy. Jessica canceled the extravagant house purchase. She and her husband bought something smaller. Something they could actually afford. For the first time in years she began making decisions without her mother's influence. Meanwhile something unexpected happened. Jessica and I started talking. Really talking. Not as rivals. Not as strangers. As sisters. The relationship wasn't fixed overnight. Years of damage don't disappear that quickly. But honesty creates possibilities. And for the first time we were dealing with honesty. One afternoon she visited my bakery. We sat in the office for 3 hours. Talking. Laughing. Sometimes crying. Filling in decades of missing pieces. By the end of that conversation we understood something important. Both of us had been manipulated. Just in different ways. Months passed. Life settled. Business continued. Orders arrived. Employees worked. Bills got paid. Normal life returned. Then came another surprise. Diane started therapy. At first nobody believed it would last. It did. Week after week. Month after month. Slowly she began confronting things she had spent years avoiding. Regret. Shame. Fear. Responsibility. The process wasn't dramatic. Healing rarely is. It was messy, uncomfortable, slow, but real. Nearly 6 months after Thanksgiving, Diane asked to meet me. Public place. Small cafe. Just the two of us. When she arrived, she looked different. Not physically. Emotionally. The confidence had softened. The defensiveness had faded. For a long time she didn't speak. Then finally she said something I never expected to hear. I was jealous. I stared at her. Of what? Your relationship with Evelyn. The answer shocked me. She looked down at her coffee. I left. A long pause. She stayed. Another pause. And everyone loved her for it. I didn't interrupt. For the first time she wasn't performing. She wasn't selling. She wasn't manipulating. She was simply telling the truth. I spent years trying to convince myself I was still the hero. Tears filled her eyes. When I saw your success, I wanted credit for it. The honesty hurt. But it mattered. Because it was real. Not perfect. Not complete. But real. The conversation lasted 2 hours. By the end she apologized. Not for everything. Not yet. But for enough. Enough to begin. Enough to move forward. A year later Thanksgiving returned. Same farmhouse. Same family. Smaller gathering. Healthier gathering. Grandma Evelyn sat at the head of the table. Emma sat beside her. Laughing. Telling stories. Stealing extra dessert when she thought nobody was watching. Diane arrived carrying a pie. Not because anyone asked her to. Because she wanted to contribute. When she entered the kitchen she paused beside me. Need any help? Simple words. Ordinary words. But they mattered. Because they were honest. I handed her a knife. Carrots. She smiled. And started chopping. No speeches. No dramatic reconciliation. No miracle ending. Just people trying. Sometimes that's enough. Later that evening I sat on the porch with Emma. The sun was setting. The air smelled like pine and fresh grass. She pointed toward an old photograph on my phone. Who's that? I smiled. That's your great-grandma Evelyn. And the baby? That's me. Emma grinned. She looks happy. I looked toward the kitchen window where Grandma was laughing with relatives. Then I looked back at the photograph. She was. The truth had cost people relationships. Reputations. Comfort. But it had given something back too. Clarity. And clarity is worth more than any invoice. My mother tried to put a price on my life. $412,850. But the woman who actually raised me never charged a penny. Because real love isn't an investment expecting repayment. It's a gift. And that's why, when everything was finally over, the only number that mattered wasn't written on an invoice. It was 38. 38 years. The amount of time one grandmother spent proving that love doesn't need a receipt. The end.